Welcome, my name is Martin Tamlyn and I manage the Ignatius Old Growth Forest Project here in Guelph. This is one in a series of videos that takes a holistic look at restoring, protecting and honouring the world around us. Today I'm very fortunate to be joined by a number of different friends, colleagues and new friends actually, as we discuss how we honour, protect and restore the waterways, particularly the Grand River. So yeah, come with us on our journey today.
We're here in the ancestral lands of the Chanaton people, the Attawandaron people, here in Dish with One Spoon territory, and a beautiful covenant agreement that was held, I believe, for many generations between the Anishnaabe peoples, the Haudenosaunee peoples, the Huron peoples, and later with us as settler folks who came to, call these places home as well. And I'm reminded in a land acknowledgement that it is, I think at one point I recognized the importance of a land acknowledgement in honoring and deeply sending our gratitude to the original and enduring stewards of these lands and waters. And yet I have to say that these days, as I'm watching the world burn, I recognize a land acknowledgement as something so much more than that, and as a reminder to us, perhaps a call to wake up, to engage in this acknowledgement as a way of being in respect and acknowledging at a very deep level the agreements that we are bound to as treaty people on these lands.
Bonjour, Northern Equa indigenous cause, Makwadodem. Wikwam Kong Menado Menacing Donjiba, Ujibwe Anishnaabe Quay, Minwa, Nijo Medewan Endao. Nagoju Anang Megwandida. My English name is Marianne Caibaiosai. I'm Ojibwe Anishnaabe from Wikwam Kong Unceded Territory. I'm Bear Clan and also a water walker. And this time, I'm very honored to begin the journey for the Grand River. I started this journey 2017, and when I was basically instructed to begin walking for the Grand River. I'd done water walks with Josephine Ba Mandaman, who gave me the teachings for the water walks, and so I began that journey. And this is 2021. We'll be walking for the Grand River once more. In September, we start at the source up at Dundalk. We'll be walking along those streams and waterways and praying for the water. We'll be singing for the water, taking care of the water, and that's our responsibility as women in our teachings, is that we are the carriers of water. And in that way, it's our responsibility to take care of her. And in those responsibilities also is that ensuring that the next generations have this water, this gift. And we believe that not only is water life, water has spirit. Like all of us, like all parts of creation, we all have a spirit. The trees here, all of the medicines, the winged ones, the swimmers, those in the water, those standing next to the water, those flying above the water, they all have a spirit, and they're our relatives. So when we talk about relations, we see them as our first teachers, our first instructors, and they guide us and teach us how to be good humans. And how to protect the water is our gift, and how to nurture her and to raise awareness. This is what our water walks are. We try to raise awareness about the spirit of life in all things, and especially the water. Because without water we wouldn't be here. And we know that many of our streams and waterways are drying up. And we need to help the water. We need to pray for the water, that she becomes clean and clear, and that she's forever flowing. We say, Gagi Gejuwan, Nibi Gagi Gejuwan, forever flowing. And that's the purpose of our water walks, is to ensure she's always flowing. And so that's what I'm guided to this year, to continue that journey, to keep praying for lifting, raising awareness of the spirit of the water. Chimigwech.
My name's Larry Halyk. I'm a retired stewardship coordinator and a resident of this watershed. And in fact, I live about a 10-minute walk from here, and I very often walk around here. And I very often sit on this very rock, sometimes for minutes or even a half hour or an hour at a time, and I just think. And what I think about is where I am is I'm where what we call Marden Creek now meets the Speed River. And I just think about the changes in this area and how 300 or 400 years ago there would have been very sensitive species like brook trout in the Speed River and in Marden Creek, and how it's changed. And up until about 25 years ago, Marden Creek was actually contributing really poor water quality to the Speed River, and now it's better and it's improving.
My name is Jack Imhof. I'm a little boy who's grown old, loving water. I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, and I spent much of my time wandering around the Grand River, turning over rocks, looking at critters, and so on. Most recently, I'm the past national biologist and director of conservation ecology for Trout Unlimited Canada, which is a national not-for-profit conservation organization. And even before that, I worked with my good friend Larry Halyk at the Ministry of Natural Resources as an aquatic ecologist. My journey, as I mentioned earlier, started as a small child. I was always drawn to water. Not just water, because water can be inert, but really to me water was living. It was living just as an entity. It flowed, it moved around in the lakes and rivers, and it held incredible critters that that were fascinating to look at, under rocks, on the rocks, beside the rivers, beside the lakes, in the lakes and rivers. So to me it was fascinating, and as I grew older I decided I needed to understand something. My first word my mother said when I was a child was why. And I followed that, and I kept asking why. And as I grew older, I decided to get into biology and then ecology to try to understand why. What are the interactions between land and water and the critters that I love and the animals and plants that I love? And how can I do a better job of better stewarding the land and better stewarding the water itself? Because ultimately water at a broader scale are the arteries and capillaries of the earth. And perhaps the first place that's most sensitive to me are the capillaries, the headwaters, because if we can fix those up, like we have done on Marden Creek here, on IGC property and further upstream, then the rest of the system will come along and we will have a healthier environment. So that's been my journey, is trying to understand why and what I can do about things to ensure that my kids and my grandkids will look back and say, yeah, at least Grandpa did something right.
So my name is Arelene Slocombe. I come from the waters of my mother, Justina Slocombe, who comes from the waters of her mother before her, was Grace Dales, comes from her mother before her, Margaret O'Malley. And I think that line goes all the way back to the waters of our original mother. And I'm so honored and proud to be part of that continuum. And I've grown up in this watershed my whole life. I feel a very particular and strong attachment to the Eramosa River, where I've spent many of my years. And I have learned that the name of that river was the Umnamosa at one point. I think it was back in 2007 when I felt a really strong calling to commit my time and energy and life to these waters that I feel so connected to. And a number of us here in this community started an organization called Wellington Water Watchers. And at that point, and since then, we've been challenging the worldview that can perceive water as a commodity, that can perceive water as an item that's for sale on the global market. And as time has progressed, we know now water's actually trading on Wall Street, and it's an affront to so many on so many levels. That our work is engaged in trying to engage our communities around us, build relationships, reattach ourselves to the waters that are the source of life for each of us, to really encourage that relationship building. Through Water Watchers, we host something called the Two Rivers Festival as a way to engage our community in coming to our water's edge in a way that's connected to their passions, so that we can continue to build our personal relationship with these sources of life.
One of the most beautiful aspects about the project here is that of engaging the community in helping folks restore a relationship with the land, but also learn how to take care of it. So whether that's through reforestation or working on streams, working in vases or planting wildflowers. And the joy I see in working with kids and adults is that one thing I notice every time is when we traverse these trails and come out and realize that there's a river here, the joy that comes across people's faces as they emerge into this spot. I mean, it is a beautiful area. Or this release people have. I often quiz, especially the younger kids, what do you think just happened to you? Because they kind of realize that there is a very strong connection they have to water. The other thing about this area here is how it connects to two things. One thing is how the whole world is connected, and I always illustrate that by just drawing the watershed really quickly. Sometimes I have a little glass of water and I pour it on this rock, and I think of this as maybe Dundalk or something like that, and just a centimetre this way, this water would go into an entirely different watershed, and if it landed this way, it will start on the Grand River. So as the Grand River is born, it comes in here, and as it travels down, you have the Conestoga River, where I live, coming to join it here, and then you have the Speed coming from here, and the Marden Creek where we are. This is the confluence right here, and just below at Cambridge there, the Speed joins the Grand River. There's the Aramosa comes in here too. As it travels down, the Nith comes in, and all its tributaries too, as it comes in, and then finally enters into Lake Erie. Obviously not to scale. Over Niagara Falls, Lake Ontario, and then the St. Lawrence, and finally into the Atlantic Ocean and across to the British Isles, actually where I'm from. So I know that I'm connected to something much bigger by standing in this spot. One of the things I'm concerned about as an educator is also to think about how big the problem of climate change is and global warming. And so sometimes I feel a bit overwhelmed at what I can do with that. So when I look at this tree, I look at all the tributaries, I know with the work that we do on the Marden Creek, with the forests and the riparian areas and all the rehabilitation and taking the dam out, how by looking after this, it feeds into a much bigger system. So when we're taking care of the Great Lakes or the oceans, by doing our small parts, all of this actually adds up to something greater.
What you see behind me is the Trout Unlimited's Strategic Watershed Action Team, or SWAT team, doing restoration work on Marden Creek on the Ignatius Jesuit Center property. We've spoken before, others have spoken before about the restoration of Marden Creek. This is an example of active restoration work to try to help the stream to narrow and become more efficient at moving water and sediment in order to rebuild pools and riffles that are important to the health of the stream and important to the health of the aquatic life that lives within the stream. So they're working with old Christmas trees to act as sediment traps. So as they narrow the channel, when the river flows high, the sediment that is naturally carried by the river is captured in the Christmas tree matrix and builds new banks while the main channel stays open that they've built. The work that they're doing is part of a science called fluvial geomorphology, which means an understanding of how rivers sculpt their channel form and structure in their floodplains over time. And all rivers in high flow carry water and sediment, all of them. And when we try to starve a river of sediment, it will find that sediment and try to recapture that. And that's why urban streams have a tendency to suddenly sink deeper and deeper into the landscape until the banks start to collapse and fall in place, because we trap all the sediment on the land and prevent the river from carrying water and sediment to maintain its balance. So in this case, we've had a stream that had a partial blockage just downstream from this location that acted as a mini dam, and during high water, the stream slowed down and all that sediment filled in and became wider and shallower over time. So what we're doing here, first of all, they removed the partial barrier with big boulders that were across the channel downstream, and now they're identifying the meander pattern that the stream wants using geomorphic principles, and they're then placing Christmas trees and logs in a way to help the channel to bounce from side to side during high water, and to then throw that fine sediment it carries during high water into the surrounding areas to build new banks. So this is using as much natural material as possible. And over time, as that sediment fills in and the sediment becomes more terrestrial and starts to suck air, if you will, the natural seed bank that's in the soil and sediment that's carried downstream will reseed the area and build new banks.
Our part of the restoration project is to take inventory of the fish species that are here. We use fish and fish communities as an indicator of environmental health. So if we can use traditional methods of collecting inventory, of finding out what's here, how much is here, which species are using what types of habitat, then we can look at that over time and we can quantify how the river's returning and being restored and building resilience. So if we see over time less sensitive species coming into the area, and that could displace, and it helps the system return back to its natural state. That takes a lot of the specialized equipment that we have. So another aspect of this project is bringing new technology in, which is in the end hopefully really going to help citizen science, and they'll be able to just collect a bottle of water and identify the fish species that are present in the water. Of what we're doing here in terms of getting it's an opportunity for us to get background and base information on how fish use the river, how we can incorporate this new technology. So when we go out to other places in Canada that are doing stream restoration, where communities are concerned about specific species of fish, whether it's like Arctic grayling or whitefish or fish that they use for sustenance of natural foods, then those communities where they won't need this specialized information, they can go out, collect a water sample, and they can get a good composite of what is in their waters. So I'm really excited to see how we compare the traditional methods of doing our fish inventories, seeing how the fish community in Marden Creek changes not even over time but along the length of Marden Creek, and how we can capture that with the new technology and give that as a tool to communities not only here but across Canada to use for the future.
My name is Erika Myler, and I'm a master's student at the University of Guelph. And my piece of this is in implementing a new technology called eDNA metabolite coding to inventory the fish in the creek. So the way that eDNA metabolite coding works is we take a water sample and isolate the environmental DNA or eDNA from the sample, and we can analyze this DNA in the lab to tell us which fish species we have in the environment without actually having to catch the fish. So we're looking forward to comparing what we find with eDNA metabolite coding to conventional methods of fish inventory like electrofishing.
So where I'm standing now, over the last 150 years, has actually been the dammed part of the Marden Creek. So there was a Scottish chap, Charles Mickle, that took on the land, and in order to take the trees out and sell the trees, he wanted some kind of a mechanical way of processing that. So like many places, these streams were dammed to take the energy from them and create a spillway. I've come into this project, I've been in my 6th year now, and I came in after that whole process of removing the dam, and it was so integral to the beginning of this project, and so symbolic as well. So when the work of removing that dam and letting the Marden Creek free, to see the health and be witness to the health returning during those years, and be one of the people to actually tell that story and celebrate it. And as Arlene talked about, is having the good news parts, you know, of what we can do. One of the favorite things about this project is there's a restoration part. So as I said about reforesting areas, creating meadows and restoring a healthy stream system and habitats, is that in that process it's just a fantastic opportunity to engage the community in that process. And you're kind of working together, you're wearing your waders, you're laughing. Even my own children have come help on this creek here. And when I first started, to actually see the populations of brook trout swim by me gave me goosebumps.
I just want to talk a little bit about the impact that our settler forefathers have had on the landscape of Canada and the United States and elsewhere. Martin mentioned the building of dams. So we're standing on the old wing walls of an old dam that was on Marden Creek for at least 186 years. Dams were critical to the economic development of the colonies and the settlers. They harnessed the power and the energy of flowing water, dammed it up, held it, and then released it to generate and run sawmills, milling areas, and weaving, and so on and so forth. It was a natural bit of energy. The challenge that we face is that was at a cost. And across Canada, we have thousands upon thousands of small dams that were utilized to build the economy of local communities, however, that are no longer needed, that damage the natural environment and the heritage of the area. And the hope now, and many of us are working on, is trying to convince communities that where there's a small old dam that no longer serves its original purpose, they should be removed to rebuild the natural heritage and natural health of the landscape and the watersheds. Especially now with higher climate variability, wetter years, drier years, hotter years, sometimes colder years, we need a more resilient natural landscape. We need a system where the water can be held in and on the landscape and released gradually and gently. Even during floods, it can be held back. During droughts, it will be used that storage to release and maintain the lifeblood of the environment in the watersheds. And as a result of that, we're trying desperately to try to convince many communities to remove small dams. I cannot remember how many small dams are on the Grand River Watershed, but if you add all the small on-stream ponds and dams on the Credit Watershed, a watershed of about 900 square kilometers, it totals over 600. Especially the small ponds. So we have a big, long way to go because every dam is like a clogged artery, and it's holding nutrients and sediment and having a major impact on the health of the natural environment, not just the aquatic environment, but the land beside the water. And as a result, we have a less resilient landscape that cannot handle higher perturbations and higher fluctuations. And this is why I think the big passion that many of us have now is to restore the connectivity to the landscape and to remove the straitjackets from our rivers and streams. And part of that is working with community, because ultimately community has to want to see a local dam removed, because many people have a sort of a love of an old dam. Even on the $5 bills, years ago, the $5 Canadian bill had a couple of kids playing shinny hockey on a frozen mill pond. That is a wonderful memory, but at the same time it came as a cost, and what we're trying to do is create new memories. And we're trying to get that by having the community touch and therefore feel the landscape as well. Touch it, to restore it, and feel and understand why they're doing it. And as a result of that, as scientists, we're trying to communicate that information to people and trying to work with them to start removing these obstructions to our beautiful rivers and streams.
So the Wellington County Stewardship Council adopted Marden Creek as a project in 1999. And we knew it was a big task. We knew that the stream had potential, and it was really representative of a lot of near urban streams in Ontario, so we thought it was a good choice. And one of the first things we did was we just started collecting information and talking to landowners and people in the community, because we wanted to get a little bit of a context from the people who live in this area, the stakeholders. And so we did a lot of that, and we learned a lot about the creek. One thing we learned was that Marden Creek had a healthy brook trout population until about the early 1970s, and then they died off. And brook trout are really important because they're environmental indicators. They really represent cold, clean water. So it was interesting for us to know about that, because what we were told by a lot of these landowners was that, yeah, they were here, but they're gone now. We can't find them. So we developed a vision statement, and our vision statement was a healthy, self-sustaining brook trout population from the source right down to the mouth. So that was our guiding principle, and our North Star was that's what we're going to do. And then we looked at, okay, what are the challenges to do that, to get that to that point? Well, the first thing we found out, the temperatures were terrible. And the temperatures were bad largely because of a number of small ponds and dams on the stream. And so we went about removing dams and ponds and also restoring the stream channel, narrowing it and making it deeper and flushing some of the fine sediments. So we got to the point where we had removed 3 ponds on Upper Marden Creek, and we got to the point where the brook trout were starting to move downstream. The range was starting to extend downstream. But we had one big stumbling block between where the brook trout were and the Speed River, and that was the dam at the Ignatius Jesuit Center. So we really, around 2006, 2007, we started planning to how could we remove this dam on Marden Creek. And the first thing you need to do is really talk to the stakeholders and the landowners in the area. And of course, the Ignatius Jesuit Center, being the owner of the dam, were the first people we talked to. And I'm blessed to have met Father Jim Prophet. And Father Jim said, well, we need to have a community open house at the Ignatius Jesuit Center. We did, and we invited all the landowners, many of them my neighbors behind me here on Cross Creek Community. And the meeting generally went well. A lot of times these meetings don't go well because people, as Jack said, have an emotional attachment to these kinds of ponds. But through the explaining why we were doing it and what our goals were, generally we got a real go-ahead from the community. And so we embarked on the removal process. What happened after that was very interesting. It wasn't long. We did more survey work, and we actually found a brook trout a few months later in the area that was a pond. And that's probably the first time in 150 years that brook trout was able to actually inhabit that area. So that was pretty exciting to us. But like today, it's a hot sunny day. I took a temperature at the mouth of Marden Creek today. It's almost 30 degrees in the air temperature, and the temperature of the creek was 16.7 degrees Celsius. That's very good. That's certainly good enough for brook trout. Now the Speed River was 24.6 degrees today. So again, we really see the progress. Marden Creek is improving the Speed River system instead of making it worse. So we're pretty excited about that. I think one of the main reasons that the Marden Creek Restoration Initiative was successful is that we had so many partners involved in working that shared our vision for Marden Creek. And that includes everyone from the people who live in this community, some of the farmers who live in this area, of course the Ignatius Jesuit Centers, and probably most importantly, the indigenous community in the Grand River. And we were lucky enough, a good friend of mine, Paul Gerald of the Six Nations Eco Center, we had him heavily involved in the planning, and his support was really instrumental in seeing this done.
One of the parts of the Grand River Water Walk that's really important, that makes us appreciate all of creation, is we start at 2 or 3 in the morning, and we're very aware of creation, and that means that we're aware of all of the small beings, like from the crickets to the small frogs, the toads. We hear everything waking up, and oftentimes we don't witness that in our daily life. People typically don't see that. They don't hear the birds. They don't hear that pattern, and that pattern is almost the same every morning. We hear all of those small beings coming to life. And so if you're stuck in your home and you automatically wake up and you're hooked onto your technology, you're not even aware of those beings out there. And so it's said that if you're not aware of who's out there or what's out there, why would you care? Why would you care about creation and about the waterways? And it's significant on our journey, this is year 4, is that we saw all of the changes in the waterways. We saw the marshes drying up. We saw the streams that used to be full of life, and they were dried up. And so that when you witness that, then you care. Then you care about it. And so as we're sharing about bringing the youth back into planting plants, any type of plants for the pollinators, the bees, and along these waterways here, the creek, and through this Ignatius Center, we're witnessing that relationship, and that's what's important. It's the relationship to the earth that's important, to all the beings. And so that that change in our spirit and how we connect, that's what we need to change with the next generations, so that they are connected to that, to all of this, all of the tree beings, all of the winged ones, all of the small ones, all of the frogs, to witness the sky changing, to witness sunrise, to witness the stars, and we've lost that connection. And so that's the importance of the Grand River Water Walk, is to invite people to reconnect with all of creation. So we want to show that part of our walk, that journey, of that responsibility. And Josephine Mondaman, she's Fish Clan, and so of course she would take care of the water. That's her responsibility. She's a woman. Anishnaabe, we're responsible for the water, but her specifically, as a Fish Clan, you follow your teachings as that clan, and hers was the fish. And so when you talked about the fish here, the trout, that's what she was thinking. All of the water beings, we have to take care of them. So Chimibach.
So when I stand on this lookout and look down at the creek and look how clear and healthy it is, it just reminds me of all the people that it takes to take care of this world. So I'm really grateful for the voices and the experiences that were shared today, and for those people that dedicate their lives to looking after these beautiful waterways.